everybody, and we are continuing what we started yesterday with the Great Wall of Base 10. Yesterday we built our wall. We looked at all the little pieces that we constructed. We understood that we had one little unit piece times 10, which made 10. 10 times 10 made 100. 100 times 10 made what, everybody? 1,000. 10 times 1,000 made 10,000. I surprised them. They didn't know I was going to make them talk. So we're continuing with what we started yesterday. So here's a smaller version, because the larger version you saw yesterday from our video is really big. And it's hard to have this up. But you can see how we have one teeny tiny little thing times 10. 1 times 10 is 10. 10 times 10 is 100. 100 times 10 is 1,000. 1,000 times 10 is 10,000. So even if we look at just these three strips, here is one group of 100. See, one group of 100, two groups of 100, three groups of 100, four groups of 100, five groups of 100, six groups of 100, seven groups of 100, eight groups of 100, nine groups of 100, 10 groups of 100. Or as little kids say, 1000. Now, if you think about it, is it really that far off? We have 10 100s, which is 1,000. Now, there's a part of this that you really couldn't see well. But it just so happens that we do have something very similar to that in our workbook. So before you get to see it, I'm going to show you what this is. With the teeny tiny little square centimeter, we understood that we had 1 square centimeter, and, well, 1 equals 1, right? Does that make sense? Okay, 1 equals 1. If we look at our next piece, it's a strip, which we need to figure out how many tens we have, how many units we have, but then we have an equal sign and they repeat it. This is going to seem really strange as we fill this out. And then it moves on to the mat, and it moves on to the strip mat, and it moves on to the mat, and we will eventually be doing that. Excuse me a moment. I misplaced one of my papers. Technically 2 of my papers. Okay, so as I was showing you, this is the paper that we have on our Great Wall. 1 unit, 1 square unit, 1 times 1. I was talking about those little tiny numbers up here, those exponents. Little tiny number. Doesn't tell it, right now we don't have any groups of 10, do we? So there's a 0. When we move on to this one, we have 1 times 10. It tells us that we have 1 group of 10. Moving on to the next part. Oh my goodness, look, we're starting to get things moved in and filled in over here. And we knew that our 100s grid is a 10 times a 10. How many 10s do we have? We have 2 of them. 10 to the second power. And I don't expect you to remember what these little guys do. You'll learn much more about that in older grades. Now we move on to our next one. That's that strip of mats where we just counted 1 group of 100, 2 groups of 100. You know, I don't want to do that again. That took too long. It's easier to say 10 times 10 times 10, because 10 times 10 is what, everybody? 100 times another 10. That's 1,000. So 10 times 10 is 100 times 10 again is 1,000. So it says we're multiplying by 10 3 times. And then we move on to the last piece of paper. That's where we had the 10 strips with 10 on each strip to form that huge square of 10,000, where we have 10 times 10, which is what? 100 times 10 again is 1,000. Okay, well, times 10 again is. So look at this. You know, they're telling us that it's 100 centimeters times 100 centimeters. Now, if we look at that, this times this, 10 times 10 equals 100. 10 times 10 equals 100. Then we can do 100 times 100. We're distributing. Okay. Everybody now is going to get out their workbook and turn to page 44. Be patient with your classmates as your classmates fill this out. Filling this out can get to be a problem for students who write big. So please be aware that some of your classmates may need some help as we're filling this out. Use pencil if you have it, so that you can erase if you need to.
Is this upside down?
So notice how I have mine positioned so I can work on mine. Do you see how I have mine positioned? I see some of you have turned your workbook. You're on page 44. 44. I am looking for a volunteer to be a partner with Trevor. He's going to need some help over there. Thank you, Luke. I'm going to have you go over by Trevor. Thank you very much. Okay, here we go. We're at the units spot. Remember what our units look like, just in case you forgot. That's our unit, that little bitty one. If we have one square unit, looking at this little mini chart, how many units do I have? Trevor? One. So right above where it says units, put a 1. Okay, so it helps us see where we are. I'm just covering other things up to help everybody stay focused. Okay, well, that one was easy. Now we're going to look at this next one, the 10. Remember, we looked at it quite a bit yesterday. So our strip, this thing, has how many little tiny square units in it? How many little tiny square units do we have? Does anybody remember? Addison, 10. So we have 10 square centimeters. Okay, so maybe we have 10 square centimeters. But now we're going to write it as tens and units. This can be confusing for some students. So I want you to look at this thing. You see that? What does this mean when we talk about one of these? What number does it represent? Trevor? 10. Okay. So if it is a 10, how many of these yellow pieces, this yellow strip, I'm going to turn it like this. How many of these things do I have in my hand? Trevor.
10.
Okay, try again. I'm holding how many? No, there's no black lines in there. How many of these yellow things do I have in there? Or how many yellow pieces do I have? Adrian? 1. It's kind of scary to think of it like that, but it is a 1. Do you see how I put that right above the 10? Now remember, if we're talking units, we're talking about these things. Okay. So if I have 10, I have a 10. This equals 10 over here, right? So I have one of these, and it means 10, correct? So do I have anything like this in my hand? No. So what do you suppose I put for the units? Brooklyn? 0. But now look at this. We have an equal sign. You don't have to put an arrow there, but I'm pointing at that arrow. It tells us, it wants us to think about this again. So I already thought about this thing as a group of 10s, and I only have one of them. So I can't do that again, so I'm not going to have any 10s this time. But if I took a scissors and cut on each of the lines here, how many of these would I have in my hand if I cut them all apart? Got a few. Oh, I got a lot of hands in the air today. Addison, 10. But what do we have left? We have only the units to talk about, right? So you have to squeeze 10 right there. So we have the 0 over the 10. And now we have the 10 over the units. And this is so confusing. But we have another equal sign. Oh, dear. We have another equal sign. So I want you to look at the number you see formed right here. What number do you see formed right there? Tell me out loud. Everybody, what is that?
10.
What number do you see formed right there? 10. Even though there's a 0 in front of it, it's still a 10, isn't it? Okay, so what do you think we put on this equal sign? Everybody.
10.
Yeah, we got 10. Okay, now we're going to move down to the next one. Again, I'm keeping the rest covered just so that we don't get confused. It's one of those things where we have to go slow before we can go fast. And it's talking about the maths. So remember, this is called a unit. This is called a strip. Or we can look on this side and we can see all the pieces glued together to make a strip. This is called a mat. When we think about that thing, do you see where it says SQCM? What do you think SQCM means? Tucker? Square centimeters. Yesterday we determined that thing is square and it's a centimeter. We proved that. We measured it. We checked it out. We know that that is a square and it's a centimeter. And so it's 1 and a 1 and a 1 and a 1. And what is 1 times 1 times 1 times 1? 1. So that's why we call it 1 square centimeter. We could set it on here. We can see it's a square. Well, our mat has how many of those 1 square centimeters on it? Addison? 100. You guys are getting good at this. Couldn't have anything to do with it. I've talked about it a lot, have I? Too bad you guys couldn't see the faces of some of the students here. Okay, now we have to look at this first thing here. If I'm going to talk about this shape, notice how I flipped it over. Still the same shape. This means what? In centimeters, square centimeters, it means what? Adrian?
1.
Good try. I do have one of them. It means 100. So this is 100. How many of these am I holding in my hand? 1. Now, do you see where it says hundreds right there? It says hundreds. How many of these am I holding in my hand? 1. So you would write a 1 there. Am I holding any of these in my hand when I've got this one all glued together?
Nope.
Nope. So we have to write a 0. Am I holding any of these in my hand when this is all glued together?
No.
Nope. Okay, well, hey, that makes sense. This is 100. That's what it says here. Huh. Look at that, 10 and 10. Okay. Now, if I would get my scissors out and I would cut this into strips, because the 10s are the strips. If I would cut this into strips, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, if I cut this into strips, I wouldn't have any hundreds left because this wouldn't be one solid block anymore, would it?
Mhm.
So we would put a 0 there. And if I cut this into strips, how many strips would I have? Jacob?
10.
10. Okay, now you got to write this kind of squishy here. We have 10 strips of 10s. Did you hear how I said that? We would have 10 strips of 10. We'll just double check it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so we're correct. So if I'm holding this as 10 strips like this, do I have any units in my hand? The little bitty guys cut into all these little pieces, do I have any of them? No, because they're all strips. So we would put a 0 for our units. Oh, we got another equal sign again. So if I actually had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. If I had 10 of these, because now I'll pretend I just magically cut those all apart. I magically cut these all apart. Now, I don't have any of these, right? We already determined I don't have any 100s. But now we already did this with having 10 10s. So now we'd have to take the scissors and cut all of these apart. If I cut every one of these apart, would I have any 10 strips left? If I cut them all apart. Okay, so I wouldn't have any 10 strips left. If I cut all these 10 strips into little bitty units, how many units would I have? Grace?
100.
100. Okay, you got to be squishy with this one. 100. Try to fit it in there. Okay, put our arrow because we have an equal sign again. Okay. I'm going to give everybody a moment so that they can write it all down. Okay. So let's get a couple of sticky notes. This is going to be easier to see it then. Okay, so if we looked at this number, it's what? What is that number I've got? Well, let's hide this one too. We don't want to see that one. Okay, what's that number, everybody?
100.
Okay, what's that number, everybody?
100.
What's that number, everybody?
100.
What do we got to put there?
100.
100. You guys are really getting the hang of this.
Just write 100 for
Okay. Now we're going to this thing. Look at that thing. I'm going to have to back the camera up a little. We did this one. We did that one. We did that one. Let's cover them up because we did them already. Now we're on this one. And this one is right here. You see this part? It says strip mat, and it needs to know how many square centimeters we have. And everybody figured out that square centimeters are all of these things, but now I have it shrunk down so it fits. How many square centimeters are in this strip? Not on that part. We don't want to talk about that part yet. How many square centimeters are on this part, Anna? 1,000. So we have to put 1,000 in this column. So there's 1,000. Oh, I bet some of you know what's coming already. But for those of you who don't, let's look only at, well, I'll cover this up first so we don't get confused. Let's look only at this part. If I am going to look at this thing called a strip of mats, a strip mat, how many of these do we have right here? We have a strip of mats. How many of those do I have? How many strips of those do I have? Akaya, 1. I have 1 of those. Is this thing cut apart into the mats, into the squares like this? Is it cut apart into those yet? No. So we have to put a 0. Is it cut apart into the 10s? Nope. Is it cut apart into the units? Nope. Okay, well, that was fast. I have an equal sign, so I got to put an arrow so I know. You know, they should really give us more room to write, shouldn't they?
Yes.
We ought to tell the company that. Oh, hey, do you know that once when we were piloting this program, the class came up with a question and we asked the people who are in charge in this company, and they actually wrote us back and did something that we asked about, or cleared up something we asked about. It was pretty cool. I don't remember anymore. It's 7 years ago.
Oh, come on.
Okay. It was in one of the units. Okay. Now we're to the second part. Remember what I've been saying. This is one group of 1,000. But if I was going to cut on all the dark lines, see those dark lines? If I'm going to cut on all of them, because we already did thousands, we're thinking about hundreds. We're going to cut it into groups of 100. How many groups of 100 do we have? How many groups of 100 do we have? Akaya. We do. We have 10 groups of 100. Did we cut it into any groups of 10 yet? We cut them into groups of 10 yet? Nope. Did we cut them into groups of units yet? Nope. Okay. Okay, now we're moving on. We already looked at if we had a group of 1,000, if we had groups of hundreds. Look at that, we have 10 groups of 100. If we were going to cut this into all of its groups of 10, how many groups of 10 are in this one? Yes, sir. But I want to work up to this. So how many are in this group? 10. So if Luke is going to count this with me. If one of these small squares has 10 groups of 10, Luke is going to count. So we have 10, we have 20.
30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100.
So we have 100 groups of 10. There's 100 groups of 10. Did we cut it into the units? No, we're not talking about its units yet. And we have an equal sign. Okay, it's to the last part that we're going to cut apart now. We already talked about when we had one group of 1,000. We talked about when we had 10 groups of 100. We talked about when we had 100 groups of 10. If we were going to cut this apart to find out how many units we have, how many units is that if we cut them all apart? And Reese is looking at me like she doesn't want to cut that. Reese, do you want to cut that? Okay, so how many pieces, how many of these units would we have if we cut it all apart? I heard somebody say it already. 1,000. Oh, goodness. Try to fit this in. I'm going to write it like this. Do you see how I wrote it kind of sideways so it fits? Okay. So again, we're going to look at this. What number do we have right there? 1,000. What number do we have again? What number do we have again? What number do we have again? Okay. 1,000. Okay, so listen to what I'm going to say right now before we do this last one. So are you telling me that 10 100s is the same as 1,000? Yeah? No? Will? Are 10 100s, I'm sorry, yeah, 10 100s the same as 1,000?
Yes.
Are 110s the same as 1,000? Okay. Are 1,000 units the same as 1,000? Oh, yeah. Okay. So now this one would be a lot of work. This would be a lot of work if we're going to cut this thing apart. So we have one mat. And one mat has how many teeny tiny little squares in it? Raise your hand. Raise your hand, ma'am. Okay, Akaya. 10,000. So I have how many groups of 10,000 in front of me? How many groups of 10,000? Okay, we've got Reese putting one finger in the air. She says we have one group of 10,000. Okay, so if we're counting 10,000s, it's not cut into thousands, and it's not cut into hundreds, and it's not tens, and it's not ones. Well, that was fast. Okay, and we have an equal sign. If we were going to cut this into strip mats, how many strips of mats do we have? We would have this one and this one and this one and this one. How many is that? What you think, Trevor? Good try. But if we're going to cut them, Reese? 10. Okay, so I don't have any thousands because we counted that. Now we have 10 1,000s equal 10,000. Shake your head, yes. 10 1,000s equals 10,000. Let's count that. Everybody get your fingers ready. Okay, so here we go. 1,000, 2,000, I can't hear you. 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, 8,000, 9,000, 10,000. Okay, so we were right. We don't have them broke into 100s. We don't have them broke into tens. We don't have them broke into units. Okay. Yeah, okay. We did 10,000. We're not talking about thousands. If I cut all of those pieces into the 100 dark squares, how many would that be? There's 10 in this row and 10 in that row. Or there's 10 in this column and 10 in that column and 10 in that column and 10 in that column. How many is that? If I counted all of them. It is a lot. Okay, Reese, are you guessing? Good try. Akaya? 100. 100 groups of 100. 100 groups of 100. It does. Okay, so we don't have them cut into groups of 10 and we don't have them cut into units. Moving on. We already did 10,000. We already did thousands. We already did the hundreds. Oh my goodness, who would we punish and make him cut this? Okay, if we were going to cut all of our hundreds into these, there are 10 of them in here. If there's 10 groups of 10 in here, how many groups of 10 are in one of these?
10,000.
We said there's 100 groups of 10 right there. Oh my goodness, somebody said 1,000. We're going to have to put 1,000 sideways because it's like really too big. Okay, 1,000. And we didn't cut them into little pieces. Okay. Well, who would we punish if we're going to cut them and make somebody cut all of those little pieces into this? Brooklyn back there had her hand up. Or maybe we'll make Brooklyn and Carter work on that. So if we're talking about units, we're not talking about 10,000s, and we're not talking about thousands, and we're not talking about hundreds, and we're not talking about tens. How many units would that be? Luke? 10,000.
How much units?
Which equals 10,000.
Way too much units.
That's an awful lot.
I don't need that much units.
That is an awful lot. Okay, how did we do at keeping up? How many of you filled it out ahead? Because you found the pattern and you just filled her out. Now, let's see how well we do on page 45. They want us just to work with a mat, a strip mat, and a unit.
Ooh, good.
Oh, people are so relieved.
I don't want to cut out those.
You don't want to cut that out. Okay, so let's think about this. Max has 5 strips. Okay, this is a strip. How many units are in Max's? How many units are in Max's strips in all? Some people are trying to figure this out. Okay, Akaya? Okay, well, one of them has 10. A strip has 10. How many strips does he have?
Oh, one.
He has 1 strip, so 1 times, or he has more than 1 strip. He has how many strips? 5. So if 1 strip has 10, it would be, somebody said it, 5 times 10 equals 50. Okay, Amelia has 10 times as many as Max. How many does Max have? I'm going to put the number above Max's name so I know.
50 times 10.
How many strips does Amelia have? How would I write that as an equation? Adrian.
50 times 10.
50 times 10. Oh, that's hard. Huh, how do we figure this out? Luke, how did you figure it out?
I had a 0.
But when you add a 0, 0 plus 0 is 0.
Add a 0 to the end of the number itself. What?
How does that work? Because if I have any number plus 0, it's still going to be that number. Luke is going to demonstrate something on the board.
Not 50 plus 0.
Well, why does that work?
I don't know.
Okay, this is what Luke just said. He says he's not doing that. He's doing this, and then he's putting a 0 on the end. So I said, well, why does that work? So Brooklyn's going to attempt to explain this, because I bet some of your parents couldn't even explain this.
Okay.
That got some giggles from people. Okay, Brooklyn.
I did 5 times 10, and then that was 50, of course. So then, if you would do that, you would keep adding. Basically, after you do that, you add a 0.
See, now that's the problem that we have is that a lot of you were taught to add a 0, whether your parents did it or not. It's what it's asking us to do is that she has 10 times as many as what Max has. So if Max has 5 of these, you would multiply that times, what is 10 times 10? Luke, I want you to listen to this. First of all, she has 10 times as many strips. So what's 10 times 10?
100.
100. And so she's got 5. What's 5 groups of 100? 500. You knew it was 500, but how do you explain it? In other words, 50 or 500 is 10 times bigger than 50. 500 is 10 times bigger than 50. So Luke, and everybody else, which is most of the class, when you just add a 0 to the end, you're telling us that the number is 10 times bigger than the number you started with. Or maybe it's 1,000 times bigger, or whatever. You're talking about how much bigger it is. Uh-oh, I just realized we jumped the gun here. It's not how many strips does she have. Right here is how many units. We were just figuring out her units. Yeah, I do that every year. I jump the gun on these. So first of all, it says, how many strips does Amelia have? So if he has 5 strips, and we figured out the units. Now she has 10 times as many strips. How many strips does she have? Instead of having 5 strips, she has 50 strips. And now this goes down here that she has 500 units. I'm going to have to make a note on my book next year to not do that. I do it every year. So, how many mats can Amelia make with her strips? If she's got 50 of these, how many of these can she make? Okay, Luke's got his hand in the air. Luke, can you explain how you figured it out?
So,
It's easy to know, but hard to show, isn't it?
Each strip is 10.
Okay.
Count by 10.
Sure, that works. If she has 50 strips and each mat has 10 strips in it, we go 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Correct? How many mats is that? Yeah. You know what you just did, though, actually, is you divided.
Yeah.
You did 50 divided by 10 equals 5. Oh, you guys are dividing. Oh, okay. Now, let's make certain that I do this in the right order. Leon has 8 strips. How many units does Leon have in his strips? He has 8 strips, correct? I wrote an 8 down. How many units are in each strip? How many units? Up here, how many units are in your strip? What's that number? How many units, how many little squares are in that strip?
10.
Reese? 10. What is 10 times 8?
80.
80. So how many units? 80 units. Okay. Uh-oh, this one looks even harder. We have to make certain we do this in the right order. Zia has 100 times as many strips as Leon. Okay, how many strips does Leon have? How many strips, Luke? Leon has how many strips? 8. And how many more times does she have? 100. So how many strips does she have?
800.
Okay. Well, how many units are in all of her strips? Okay, so let's talk about our strips. We have to start with her strips. How many units are in the strip? In one strip? Up here, this one. How many units are in there?
10.
10. Okay, do that problem, people. See if you can figure it out. Write it in your book. See if you get an answer, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, notice that I wrote something at the bottom here. I did a place value chart. I'm going to use this place value chart to help us figure this out. Okay, when we talk about strips, what is this number? See that number? What is that? Raise your hand. What number do I got between my fingers? Tucker. 10. Here's the ones, here's the tens, here's the hundreds, here's the thousands. Okay. So how many tens do we have? How many tens do we have? How many tens are we going to have? 800 groups of 10, correct? Watch me do this. We have 800 groups of 10, correct? Do we have any ones? No. What number do we have? What number is this? Anybody see this number on the bottom? What number is that? Somebody just said 8,000. Luke, remember when you were doing this? You're thinking about it like this. You have 50 groups of 10. This is your tens. And you don't have any ones, correct? That's what this is. Eventually, you're going to learn how to write it like this. Think of how many times you were told when you were adding, you can only have one number in a column, right? If you regroup, you have to put your group of tens in the next column. You have to put your group of 100s in the next column. And so many of you were taught to carry the one without being explained why, that you don't understand how multiplication works. So that's why we were going so slowly at this. When people jump to teach you the procedure without teaching you the understanding, the harder the math gets, the more confusing it becomes. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how many mats can she make with her strips. How many mats can she make? Let's think of this number. If we have this in all, correct? Let's do our place value thing. We have ones, we have tens, we have 100s, we have thousands. Are we talking about thousands or are we talking about 100s? How many can we make? What did I underline? 8 and the 0, right? So how many is that? 80. You just did a dividing problem. I'm trying to show you with place value how this works. So how many mats? How many mats? We're talking about our 10,000s. One one strip mat is our thousands. So we can make 8. Okay. We're going to stop right here. We're not going to get to number 5. For those of you at home, you are going to do a quick quiz on dividing. Those of you at home, you're going to be looking for this page. There are only 18 problems on this. You cannot use your you can't use a multiplication table. You cannot use a calculator. This should not I'm not going to give you more than 5 minutes to do this. So those of you at home, this is what you're getting out. Those of you here are closing your books. And everybody's going to tell you bye. Bye.